day, everyone. I am Janet Arceriaco, and I'm here with my group mates. And we are here to discuss the Unit 5 of Understanding the Self, Eastern and Western Thought about the Self. So, shall we start? First, let's talk about individualistic versus collective thoughts. Did you ever think as yourself having a particular philosophical point of view because you are an Asian or a Westerner? Well, if you say so, then you are right, because social, political, and cultural values have a lot to say about our philosophical convictions. If you hear the phrase, no great idea is born in isolation, means that we as an individual who has different culture but born in the same land, we might have a similar philosophical views in life. And we can be who we are because we all have what it takes to be an individual. That is our identity, which is our culture, tradition, and values. Now, let's talk about the different states of the East and West in their own views and perception of what is the self. Well, there are some similarity in the Eastern and Western views about the self. They highlighted it as the self is the stress on constructing the self in relation to other, meaning the self is constantly trying to form a relation to other people but causing a stress to the self itself. Both investigate that self have a continuous relation between self, culture, and social organization where the self belongs. It's that the self is having a continuous relation where the self belong like a particular group who talks about culture, beliefs, and norms where the self is located with. And the biggest contrast in both Eastern and Western thought is how the self is seen in relation to others. It differs on how they view the self forming a relationship to other individuals or to the society itself. Now, let's talk about the different views of Eastern and Western. Eastern philosophy view is the awareness of unity and mutual interrelation of all things and events in life. They viewed it as that all things are inseparable or can't be independent as its own, same with how body and self can't be separated from each other. It is viewed in Eastern thoughts that self is inseparable with the things revolving around it, like for example beliefs and culture. Meanwhile, the Western philosophy is associated with science and religion, and the main values are individual success, achievements, and happiness. The individual is given the prominence as he/she tries to find truth and meaning in life here and now. It is said that an individual's success is not necessarily dependent in others and society in general. Western philosophy subscribes to science and religion. The main values are individuals' own success in life. Here, it is viewed that the life of an individual is merely based on one's capability to success and not necessarily depending on anything in society at all. An individual is given the opportunity to find the truth about his own life and its meaning and make the most of it. Social construction of the self in the Western perspective. The advancement of technology in modern world has created a confidence and independence in the self. As per the technology continues to evolve, people are now independent with the help of platforms to get their daily needs and necessities. The Western thought do not have a holistic view, rather, they have worldview that underscore the importance of the part than the whole. West believes that parts of holistic view is more important than the whole idea of holistic view itself. Basically, they prepare to do things separately because they promote independence in everything an individual can do. The West values individualism and freedom. Being dependent to things, other people, and society in general is not how Western view the self. Being independent and having their freedom in everything is how they see the self and how they have observed the self in their own philosophy, and saying that self is the architect of its own life, setting its own goal and rules in life even if it doesn't line with the overall goal of the society just to achieve independence in life. They are promoting individual right is more prominent over duties, simply saying that an individual's right is more important than duties to the society itself, promoting that freedom of choice is more important than how we should socialize to others in society. The self as embedded in the Oriental thoughts. While Western counterpart highlighted the importance of individualism, the Eastern thought values unity and harmony and being part of the greater whole, where everything is connected and interdependent of others and nature. Life is a translation or extension of the self. Spiritual belief and life are connected. Eastern views that the self must place duties over rights. Eastern basically believes that life and self is one, not living independently from each other and promote dependence to one another. It is connected in every part of its views in life. And Eastern is contrasting the Western views that rights over duties, by believing that duties must come first than the right of an individual because an individual finds success and fulfillment in a shared goal of the society, then setting out his own goal that may not conform with the societal goal. Now, let's summarize the Eastern and Western thought.
The self in Hinduism. Hinduism often have a question, who is the self? And I answer with the phrases, the self is Atman, and Atman is the innermost essence of the self whose destiny is to be Brahman in Nirvana. And attachment of the self to be the material world leads to samsara. This means the Creator is the state of highest freedom and happiness in life, liberated from all attachment in the life that may cause suffering. Reincarnation of the self is a form of suffering because the self is kept coming back to the material world thinking that is the real destiny. Reincarnation is basically a form of illusion to the individual thinking that coming back to the material world is their destiny to correct their past mistakes. But in reality, it is form suffering. Rebirth is suffering of samsara and a form of maya that people should ignore and realize that the self is not maya, but Atman, to liberate themselves from the suffering of life and join the universal spirit Brahma and became one.
The self in Buddhism. The doctrine of non-self or anatta dictates that the self is subject of the law of change, saying that including the self is constantly changing from birth to growth until death, saying that the self is composed of five aggregates: matter, sensation, perception, mental construct, and consciousness. All are transitory to nature, meaning not permanent. That why there is no such permanent in the self. Buddhism discards the existence of the self, believing that the self is only an illusion in life, saying that the self is only an illusion, adding that false belief of the self being permanent is causing harmful thoughts of the self, desires like me and mine, mentality meaning being greedy and egoistic, to all thing and other thing that causes or the trouble in society. Buddhism believes that the self is not permanent, a subject of law of change. That said, being not permanent is the way to achieve enlightenment in life. Buddhism made a goal to achieve enlightenment and freeing oneself in suffering. 1. Know the Four Noble Truths that there is suffering in this world. The cause of suffering is craving for self-identity as its permanence. There is a way out of this bondage if suffering ends. 2. The way to get out of suffering is by practicing the Eightfold Path.
The self in Confucianism. The self is moral and social being. Confucius was essential concern with what made a good life. Being a good to other make your life easier, right? Doing what is a morally good and socializing with people with a good intention bring back good karmas in life and vice versa to being a bad. The self is composed of moral and virtues such as benevolence, righteousness, propriety, and loyalty. Being made with these virtues and following it makes a good life. That is what Confucius what to know and prove. In a relation to universe, the self is just a said to be a that in the universe and just a part of the nature. Being said that the self should live a life in accordance with the nature to achieve that highest conformity of being wise as a person and to live being one with the nature itself that Confucius wants us to understand.
Self-Taoism. The philosophy of Taoism advocates natural and spontaneous, simple, and necessary. Taoism is derived from the word Tao, or the way of nature. To bring the self, bring one with nature. Taoism suggests that the self must practice the three virtues of Tao: humility, frugality, and contentment, to achieve harmony in nature, saying that the self should to strive for things but rather just waits for them to happen if it's for them, and live in happiness and be humble in life. The ways that self should practice Bupi are the non-interference with the natural causes of events, saying that interfering with natural events mostly causes problems in the world if the self is being too active in participating to achieve harmony with nature, quoting that too much can lead to destruction.
Filipino concept of the self. Did you ever ask yourself or the people around you the philosophical question, what is a Filipino? And do Filipinos have their own concept of the self? Well, if now, then let's talk about it. Most worldview of the Filipinos are in common with the Oriental thoughts, but some other neighboring countries thought that we are Filipinos are the most westernized person because of the captive and colonial habits from the past. Well, Filipino are multi-layered due the influence of the foreign countries, but how do we define a Filipino as a self? Well, we as Filipino have been based off the concept pagkatao and loob as our definition.
Pagkatao or humanity in English, being said that Filipino is a living person just like anyone else, and being an exemplified Filipino holistic worldviews and interiority can be defined by being harmonious in anything life, showing inferiority to anyone, and having human-heartedness that shows the concept of being interdependent with others and being socially open to anyone by pakikisama, camaraderie, hospitality, and many more that can be distinguished in every individual. That is Filipino by heart, mind, soul, and blood, and therefore Filipinos as the self can be defined as a relational being who always thinks, acts, behaves, and decides always in accordance with his being with others.
In summary, both West and Oriental thoughts are the manifestation of their own cultural differences, values, tradition, and principle of how they live and how they view life as an individual that is part of society or being an individual for oneself only. Both shows the importance of knowing the self in accordance of nature and understanding the relation of it. However, differences can be controlled by proposing both ideas, insight, and thoughts in both parties is part of being united and creating harmony to understand the relation of self in nature.